Hi, my name is Ann Sermons Gillis, and I am on the National Board of the Theosophical Order of Service. And I have the pleasure today to interview a most interesting woman. This woman, like many of us, was looking for something that she didn't even know was missing, and that was a home. And she started studying Theosophy in 1994, and by 1996, she was hooked and she joined. She became a very active member, and she started serving as a secretary of the Denver Center in 2006. She served as the secretary many times through the years, and she's remained actively engaged in other positions as well, including the web designer, wow, and the webmaster, outreach publicity coordinator, book agent, healing meditation coordinator, TOS Liaison, treasurer, programming, presenting, and whatever needed to be done. If it needed to be done, she was the one they called on. She's one of the busiest women I know, and she does more than most people. She particularly enjoys coordinating service projects for the Denver Study Center each year. Since 2011, she served on the board of directors of the Theosophical Society of America, and including one term as vice president. From 2011 to 2016, she served on the board of directors of the TOS USA, and including one term as secretary. And during her time on the board, she also served as TOS Liaison coordinator. And in that capacity, she published an e-newsletter for TOS liaisons and local group leaders. She was called the Spirit of Service. It was called the Spirit of Service, and it was published from 2012 to 2016. So I'll go back on that, and that is that she published a newsletter called the Spirit of Service, a wonderful name for a newsletter. She works as a paralegal in Denver, Colorado, and she has 2 grown children. I'm very excited today and pleasure to welcome Kathy Gann. Welcome, Kathy.
Hi, Ann. Well, thank you so much for having me. This is a pleasure.
Oh, good. Well, I just want to find out some background information. And for those of you that are watching, the reasons that I'm doing these interviews is because the Theosophists that I'm talking with often give programs, and they often do many things like Kathy does, but we don't hear their own spiritual journey. And so that we could hear what they've been through and maybe share that with subsequent generations, then that's what these videos are about. So we're going to start right at the very beginning, Kathy. And I'm wondering, where were you born?
Huron, South Dakota.
South Dakota.
Not very many people are from Huron, South Dakota, but there's a few of us. Cheryl Ladd was born there.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, what was the name? How do you spell that?
Huron, H-U-R-O-N.
Huron. Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. And then now somehow you ended up in Colorado.
I did. I moved out here in 1980. I just wanted a bigger city, and I just had the urge to move.
So you moved to Denver.
I moved to Denver.
Would you say that was an intuitive move?
Definitely. It made all the sense in the world with my job, with where my relatives were, where my family was, just geographically. It made a lot of sense for me to move to Minneapolis. And that's what I was prepared to do up until about 2 months before the move. And then something took hold of me, and it just had to be Denver, and nothing else would do. And I can't explain it any better than that. That's all there was to it. It had to be Denver, and nothing else would do.
Have you ever regretted moving to Denver?
Oh, no, not for a moment. I love it here.
It's a perfect place for you. I love that story. It's a wonderful story. Well, now going back to even earlier, and that is, as a child, were you raised in any religion? And what I'm trying to get at, and if you could just expound on that a little bit, is this religion something that you had to overcome, or did it enhance your spiritual journey?
So I was raised as a Christian Protestant in the Plymouth Congregational Church. It's a rather liberal form of Christianity, of Protestantism. And we were, I guess, mildly active. I went to Sunday school as a child and was confirmed at the age of, I think, 13 or 14. I wouldn't say it was something I had to overcome. I always jokingly tell my mother, sorry, Mom, it just didn't take. Because I was just always not really satisfied. There didn't seem to be a lot of substance. Some of it made sense, but I was needing more substance.
Well, did you have any religious or philosophical talks with your parents? Did they encourage it at all, or was it just kind of blank subject?
Yeah, it was kind of blank. I don't recall that we really talked about that topic in the home.
Well, no, I know that something happened. Because here we are talking today. So you didn't get it. It wasn't a seed planted in early childhood. So what happened? Where did you start this spiritual journey?
Well, I always say that I didn't find Theosophy, but Theosophy found me. One day I was in a library, it's a very small Denver Public Library. I had taken my daughter there for a school research project back in the days before the internet, when you still went to the library for school research. And I was looking in a particular section of books, and I couldn't find what I was looking for, but I saw a section, oh, maybe 2 shelves, maybe 3-4 feet wide. And I'll just say it was various systems of alternative thought, alternative spirituality, alternative thought, things like astrology, numerology, Scientology. And then there was a section about that wide, maybe all of 4 books on something I'd never heard of before called Theosophy. And literally something within me said to pick a system and study it. And I balked at that idea because I don't do that sort of thing. That wasn't anything that I was aware that I was looking for. But nevertheless, I went through each of the books. I opened a book on astrology, a book on numerology. I thought, yeah, there's probably something to that. Opened a book on Scientology. That didn't take either. But then when I opened a book on Theosophy, and fortunately I picked a book called Intro to, it was as though everything I had been thinking, it was as though the way I had been thinking was now put down in print. I didn't even know that there were other people who thought along those lines. Now I was seeing it in print in an older book, and I was just floored. So I kept reading and I kept paging through, and wherever I turned in the book, it was either similar to the type of thinking that I had been doing, or it certainly made sense to me. Maybe it's something I hadn't thought of, but it made sense. Nevertheless, I put the book back on the shelf, didn't intend to check it out. And this something within me that was prompting me said, pick a system and study it. So I went through the whole process again. Same result. Once again, I balked and pulled back, and I wasn't going to check anything out because I just don't do that sort of thing. And this thing within me said, it won't kill you. So I checked out 1 or 2 books on Theosophy, devoured them. I remember I was reading 2 different books at the time, and I never have gone back and finished those books because I really just put everything down and have studied Theosophy ever since. So that was it. I found it. It found me at a library. I guess it was just maybe meant to be. Maybe it was just time.
That sounds like destiny to me. The destiny was pulling you along the way. Sometimes it sounds like you're a little kicking and screaming, but it was pulling you along the way.
Yeah.
Since you have gotten into Theosophy, are there any particular practices that this spiritual practices that this has led you to do? We have different things that we're called to do, like study and meditation and so forth. What was your path with all of that?
Well, kind of the 3-legged stool of Theosophy, not one thing in particular, but I really took to heart that 3-legged approach of study, meditation, and service. And probably in the earlier years, I was bigger on study, just devouring everything I could get my hands on. In more recent times, maybe that has given way a little bit more to active service, since I've been, had an opportunity to serve on the board of the TS and the TOS. I really love the service component. So, and of course, meditation has been a constant throughout.
Well, I just so many people want to meditate and they have a difficult time to meditate. Do you have any kind of advice for somebody who's just beginning on this spiritual path, somebody that wanted to meditate? Do you have anything you could say to them that might be comforting as they jumpstart a meditation practice?
Well, I guess the only thing I would say, it's not going to sound very profound, but it's so true, is just not to think that it has to, that the experience has to be deep and profound, and it has to be this, or it has to be that, or it has to feel like this or look like that, but just to sit quietly and aim for stillness, or try to take a seed thought. That's what I did in the beginning. I would look at a theosophical book the night before, I would pick out a seed thought, and then when I went to sit down, I had something picked out that I was going to focus my mind on. And that really helped kind of shut out all the other noise, because if other thoughts crept in, then I could just return to that seed thought. And the other thing I would say is just be compassionate with yourself, and don't beat yourself up because the mind wanders. Everybody deals with that.
So take a compassionate approach. And also it sounds like you started out more with contemplation, that
Yeah.
you were contemplating a word and then letting that feed you. That's
That's
wonderful,
thought, yeah.
wonderful advice. Are there any teachers, living teachers, that have influenced you in your theosophical studies or just your spiritual journey at all?
Well, I'm going to include Joy Mills, even though she has recently passed, because my contact with her was very important to me.
She was living when you...
She was living, yes, after I entered the Theosophical Society, and so she was a wonderful teacher.
Can you tell me more? I only met her once and heard her speak once. Could you just tell me a little bit more about that relationship, or your learning relationship with her?
Here's the funny thing about Joy. She came out to Denver to attend a particular trial that was going on. She was a witness in a trial that was going on here in Denver in the federal courts. It had to do with the Masonic organization. And so while she was here, she was invited to speak to our local TS group, which she did. And afterwards, she was, milling about the room and visiting with people and getting to know people. And I just felt that I really made a nice connection with Joy. Like there was something kind of a special connection there. And then later I was talking with a couple of theosophical friends. We were at a member study meeting, and one of them said, I really enjoyed meeting Joy Mills. I really felt like we had a special connection. And I realized that's just Joy. She just had a way of making everyone feel that they had made a special connection, that she just had that gift. And, later in her life, one time I was giving her a hug for one reason or another, and she kind of leaned into my ear and she said, "I will help you in any way I can."
Oh,
so sweet.
Oh, so wonderful.
Yeah, she's such an inspiration. I love her. I love her writing. I love her talks. And then also, I think, a lot of inspiration from Maria Parison and Nelda Samaral.
Who was the third one?
Nelda Samaral. So Maria and Nelda served as my mentors when I went through the Partners in Theosophy program. That's a leadership development program that the Theosophical Society had. I believe it's still active, but it may have changed forms. I'm not sure exactly what form it's in right now.
Okay. Well, we've talked a little bit about this, but of course, one of the cornerstones of Theosophy is service. And, we're doing this as the Theosophical Order of Service, and you've done a lot of work, service work. Could you speak just a little bit more of service work and maybe, how that's helped you with your spiritual journey, and any particular projects that you had? I think you mentioned one to me, and this was the 2019 TOS campaign for kindness. So maybe you could just speak a little bit about service and speak about that event.
Yeah, so just service in general. Again, my advice or what I have to say about it won't sound very profound, and it won't sound very different from what other people say, but it doesn't have to be big and flashy and glamorous. It truly is doing what you can from where you are with what you've got. I mean, that is all that any of us can do. And so for example, we had a TS member here in Denver years ago who was very elderly and was essentially a shut-in. She was confined to her apartment unless, you know, family would come and take her out. But she spent her days in that apartment because she was quite frail by that time. But she had a 4th floor apartment, and she looked down onto a busy street, and she talked about how she would sit there and watch the pedestrians and the cars, and she would send them little thoughts of kindness, little blessings, just send them light. And she would do that much of her day. Now that's an incredible example of doing what you can with what you've got from where you are. So to me, that's kind of the essence of service. And then when I joined the board of the TOS, I really had an opportunity to, you know, dig in and become even more active. So as TOS Liaison Coordinator, one of the projects that I particularly enjoyed was the campaign for kindness that we did. It was actually 2017. And so I announced that we were going to be running a 30-day campaign for kindness. And I promised everybody that they would remain anonymous. I wanted to encourage them to report their acts of kindness to me. Didn't want them to feel that they were tooting their own horn. So everybody was promised anonymity. And I think because of that, people felt more comfortable telling me about the projects. And I want to share just a few of them with you because they're just, I mean, there are 29 that people reported to me, which means there must have been, I don't know, hundreds, if not thousands, but at least 29 were reported within this campaign. I won't read all of them, but I just want to share a few. So the first one I got was from a gentleman who works as a college professor during the day. And he said, on my days off, I provide free plumbing and electrical help to whoever needs it. My community has many elderly people, and I've been busier than busy, as you can imagine.
Wow.
One person said that they assembled Ziploc bags of essentials like water, snacks, and socks and gave them to homeless people. One man said, despite the fact that my daughter is in dialysis, she is pushing herself to start a kidney support group to help others. She is one awesome young lady. One man said, every fall since 2002, I've donated dictionaries to 3rd graders at 27 schools in Chicago's western suburbs. He said he does a 30-minute talk to teach them how to use their new dictionary. He said it's so important to get the kids to start using this book while they're still young. So that was quite an amazing project. Somebody reported that she worked at a school, and one day a lady called. Here's an idea for service. Well, one day a lady called and she said she wanted to pay off a lunch account balance. And so the person who answered the phone said, okay, what is the student's name? She said, oh, I don't have anybody in mind. I want you to give me the most delinquent account and I'll pay that one off. So there's a wonderful idea for service. I thought that was very creative.
That is a good idea.
One person said, several years ago, I started to carry in the empty garbage cans of my neighbors on garbage day. I figured that would make life a little easier for both my elderly neighbors and also those who work. Once they realized what was going on, they seemed appreciative, which was a nice reaction, but not necessary. I did it because it helped the people around me, and that was rewarding enough. And then here's something a little more formalized. This person said, I raised $1,764 for St. Baldrick's, which is a leader in funding research for childhood cancer. In addition to that, she raised $200 and donated her beautiful long hair to an organization called Hair We Share so that they could make a wig for a child who had lost their hair due to cancer treatments. Here's another simple one that almost anybody can do in their own way, even if not in this way. She says, when I see Facebook posts by rescue groups about animals in need of emergency care, I'm not always able to send money. So I've started doing the Ho'oponopono prayer as well as long distance Reiki on the animals. That's a wonderful idea.
Wow.
Even if you just send thoughts of compassion and healing to the animal, if you don't know Reiki and don't know the Ho'oponopono prayer, that's something that any of us can do. The same person said, my friend was having lots of medical problems and his birthday was near. I alerted his friends and asked them to call him, not just post on Facebook. He was thrilled to talk to so many friends that he normally wouldn't have. And here's the part I love about this. She said, I think those things really matter. I'm sure he felt the love. One person took the bus to and from work every day, and she said that every time she got off the bus at the end of the day, she would make a point of turning around and giving a little wave to the bus driver. It sounds like such a tiny thing, but if you think about from the bus driver's perspective, how often are they seen and appreciated and acknowledged for being an individual? How often would people really wave to them? It must have been just such a little bright spot in that person's day. Another person helped shuttle a TS Lodge member to and from TS meetings when they could no longer drive. And the same person said, I love this one, I deliberately use humor and teasing in my office most days to foster good feelings among coworkers and refocus attention from insignificant annoyances to loftier things. So, the stories go on and on, but those are some of the highlights. And I just loved that project. So
that is a wonderful project. And I'm often thinking, I'm on the board now, you're back on the board, and that we need to do that one again.
We could definitely run that one again. Yeah, it's lovely.
It's something that we can do. I think one of the problems in getting TOS active now that, since we've been Zooming and so forth, and a lot of lodges don't even get to, they'll have 2 or 3 people at the live meeting, and at the hybrid, there'll be a lot more people on Zoom. But while that could be done, a 30-day project, that could be done with a Zoom project. I love that. We need to get that one going. And just for people that are listening, I would challenge you, take 30 days. Let us know what you did. Take 30 days, give your 30 days of kindness. It doesn't have to be every day, but your project, and let us know. Put it in the remarks. Let us know what you've done.
Yeah, that'd be great.
That's great. Thank you. And then there was another, in terms of Theosophy, Theosophy for children, I know you told me you could say something about that. And I'm wondering, in terms of service, if, goodness, teaching children to know who they are and really be in contact with their intuition and to have a greater grasp of wisdom, that just be amazing. Can you tell us a little bit about Theosophy for children, what your ideas are for that?
Yeah, this started, I guess, quite a number of years ago. Somebody in California was cleaning up the home of a Theosophist family member who had passed away. And somehow they knew about the Denver Theosophical Society, and they asked if we would like to have this person's Theosophical books. So I accepted them, and so I received 4 boxes of books, and I was going through cataloging each one and adding it to our library list. And I came across this one. It's called Life Spark Stories by an anonymous author, RK. And I was kind of intrigued, and I sat and started reading it. And this was written probably around the years leading up to World War I, I'm going to say, probably in Victorian times. It has an incredible sweetness to it, and it's almost like Secret Doctrine for kids. This is talking about the evolution of life from the mineral kingdom, then into the vegetable kingdom, then into the animal kingdom, and then into the human kingdom, and eventually entering the spiritual path once you've been in the human kingdom for a while. And it's all put into a series of such sweet stories for children. I just thought, okay, this has to be republished for kids these days. And I rewrote it a little bit and kind of smoothed out some of the edges, took out a chapter that I felt didn't belong, and just kind of tried to keep the sweetness, but maybe just fix a few things that I felt needed to be smoothed out. And I have not yet published it, but someone else has. So you can actually get this on the internet today if somebody wants to get the original version. And this has the original illustrations. They can Google it, and you can actually find that book today. And it's just a lovely, lovely way to teach children about this evolution of life and consciousness. So I think that's maybe what triggered it. And then we had kind of a magical event that happened here in Denver in 2008. It was one of those things where the right people came into my life at the right time, and it literally fell together like magic. I met a young woman who had 2 children, and we were talking one day, and I was telling her about the Theosophical Society and telling her that someday I would love to do a project where we take children out into nature to build fairy houses. I had just seen the website fairyhouses.com, which is a fantastic resource, and it's still up and running, I think, if anybody's interested. And she was enthralled. And so the two of us put this together. So in 2008, we took a group of children out into nature, adults and children, and we built fairy houses. And it was absolutely magical. I think I put together a little video, and maybe we can link to that video. It's been on YouTube all this time, but there was, I was flitting back and forth between this child and that child and the different family groups putting their houses together. And I mean, we had some amazing houses. We had 2 fabulous beach houses, one of which was completely appointed with a little fairy bed. There was a flower petal for a quilt. There was, of course, a flat screen TV at the foot of the bed. The bedroom was adjacent to the fairy bathroom, which was fully appointed with all fixtures. There were chairs, there was furniture. There was a little brass roof over the house. There was, of course, a huge pool in the back. And we had 2 fabulous beach houses with pools that day from 2 groups of kids who were on opposite sides of a creek. So they each came up with this on their own. That day was pure magic. And as I went from group to group taking photos and talking to the kids about their project, one word kept presenting itself out in front of me in my mind's eye, and that word was real. Capital R, all caps, R-E-A-L, real. There was just something so real, and it's hard to put it in any other terms than that. But there was something so real about what we were doing out there that day. First of all, nature is real. Children are so real. The idea of doing a loving act of service for the fairies by these pure-hearted children, that's as real as it gets. And you know how we always say there's that it's not a mantra, but there's a teaching, and part of it is from the unreal, lead me to the real. So I always say, if you want to be led from the unreal to the real, try going into nature with children and build fairy houses. It's a can't fail.
So these houses, I think I remember the project. I think I saw the video, and these houses, now these were left in the wild?
They were left, but I went back about a week later and nature had taken its course. And, as there's wind and rain and so forth, most of them were mostly taken apart and unrecognizable within a week or 2.
Yeah, I understand. Well, I have twin grandsons, and every time, now this is not, it's certainly not a service to the leprechauns, but every St. Patrick's Day they build leprechaun traps, and they have these wires and everything going in the trees, and we have a lot of fun building leprechaun traps. And there's a part of me that says, you don't really want to trap a leprechaun, that's not the most generous thought, but it's just so cute that they get all excited about building leprechaun traps. They've never caught one, so I think the leprechauns are smarter than
they're onto you.
Yeah, they're on to us, so I don't think there's any danger for the leprechauns at all. But that's just such a wonderful project. Well, it seems to me that you do have a lot of creativity and gusto when it comes to service projects. And this is just a spur of the moment question, but I'm just wondering, do you have any ideas, other ideas for service projects that people might do if they happen to be listening to this? Do you have anything that's up for you that you're thinking, boy, I really want to get this going?
Oh, goodness. Well, I think, COVID really put a damper on a lot of groups that we're trying to serve, but we always have our minds. And so thought power is one of the #1 ways that anybody can serve, whether they're part of a group or not. You can do it immediately. You can do it as often as you want, and you can do it in any way that seems pertinent to you. So that's always one way that any of us can do. We can always send thoughts of light or healing or wholeness in whatever way seems appropriate to us, to whatever local or national or world situation, or perhaps just a person who's suffering. You can always send them thoughts of healing and wholeness and envision that person happy and whole and well and beaming with optimal health.
Well, that leads me to one of the things that you've done. I can read this in your bio, and that is healing meditation coordinator. Was that something you did in Denver, or was that in the national TOS? And what was that?
So we started doing that in Denver probably in 1997. And at that time, we were not connected with the National TOS. We used the same healing meditation, the same service, the same words. And we did the ceremony exactly the same way that the TOS does. But it was not until later, until after I took over as study center secretary, that I connected it with the National TOS. And so we became one of the local healing groups. And so ours has been going continuously since 1997.
Well, can you say a little bit more, because many people have never heard of this healing group that'll be
Sure, it's something that was originally written by Jeffrey Hodson. And Jeffrey was a clairvoyant, a very, very talented clairvoyant, as tested and verified even by scientists who made a concerted effort to trick him when they were testing his clairvoyance. And he was reliable every single time. But Jeffrey said that he could communicate with angels, devas. And so he did a lot of work communicating with them, and it was a lifelong interest of his to talk about and launch initiatives for the cooperative work between angels and humanity. And he even wrote a book called The Brotherhood of Angels and of Men. So that was one of his pet projects. So he wrote this healing service a long time ago, and it does invoke angelic presences, and it invokes universal healing power. And I've been doing it for a long, long time, and I can tell you that it is powerful and it is real. It creates an atmosphere of upliftment, inspiration, and loving energy. There's just nothing else like it. One time I had finished the ceremony, and you finish kind of quietly. And so I would always just quietly step away and leave everything undisturbed for a while before I cleaned everything up after a ceremony. And I did that one time, and then I came back to the table where everything was. And as I got within a few feet of it, it's as though I had entered, I don't know how to say it, except it was like I had entered a wall of love, like I could feel the loving energy. It was still there. So it's an amazingly powerful ceremony. If you know of anyone who needs healing, the TOS does have these 2 healing networks, one for humans and now one for animals, which is a very similar ceremony and absolutely delightful. Slightly different energies in my experience, but both just so uplifting and just wonderful.
That's great. Thank you. Now, is this a ceremony that somebody could do on their own? Like,
Absolutely.
can they get, I mean, do you have the paperwork for that so that we could maybe put that up as a PDF link?
Probably what we would do is refer them to the Theosophical Order of Service website, theosophist.org. And there's a page for the healing services, and they could contact the healing coordinator, and she could get them all the instructions and the wording of it if they wanted to take part as a healing meditator or as a group.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'm going to switch the topic a little bit and go back. I know that I asked you about living teachers that had influenced you. Do you have a favorite, a theosophical personage of the past, someone that, I don't know, O'Connor, Leadbeater, or Besson, or, any of the people that from the past that you identify with more or just like?
Yeah, I'm a huge Annie Besant fan, as most of us are. I'm a Clara Codd fan. Clara Codd, I think, is a very underrated writer. And some of her writing was probably more pertinent in her day. She tended to write sometimes with a fairly religious, kind of traditionally Christian style, which doesn't work for everybody. But if you can look through that and look at the substance of what she's saying, it's exquisite. Absolutely exquisite, and such a lovely, just person-to-person, down-to-earth, grounded conversational style of writing. I really enjoy Clara Codd's writings. And a little-known story about Clara Codd and Joy Mills. Joy told me this. When Joy was young, she had gotten a teaching degree, and so she spent a few years teaching before she worked full-time for the Theosophical Society. But it was Clara Codd who was visiting the US one day, and Joy was there. And one time Clara turned to Joy, looked her in the eye, and said, "Joy, you must give your life to Theosophy." And as we all know, Joy did. So thank you, Clara Cott. She gave us the gift of Joy Mills.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. And that's, you know, this was one thing that someone said that may have, or she may have been on that path anyway, that absolutely turned her life around.
Yeah.
I think that's what we as Theosophists count on, that there is this path that we can step into, and we don't really know where we're going, but we do tend to be led wherever it is we need to go. And
Definitely.
but we have to trust that. And it's like, if we don't trust it, we can't see it. And so
And I think we also have to trust when we have in mind to say something like that to someone. Sometimes we can have a tendency to clam up a little bit and think, well, I shouldn't be saying that to someone. I shouldn't be telling them what to do. And yet I've had that happen to me where it seemed as though something came through me to someone, and it turned out to be important for them.
yes, I've even had, I'm thinking I should say something. I'm not going to say that. And my body starts saying, I start saying it. And I said, wait a minute, I said I wasn't going to say that. But it's like something starts saying that. And it's like, okay. And you know, and it is the right thing. Well, one of the things I like, that's kind of like intuition. And I think that Annie Besant said that with intuition, if you really get this deep intuition and you have a chance to wait, then intuition will just keep coming at you and it won't leave you alone. But if it's more something like just a human desire, like I've got to have this, you know, I'm addicted to getting more stuff or something like this, or this is a pleasure that wouldn't hurt me, that probably will fade away. And I love that particular piece of advice, and that is that it usually it'll just keep following us around until we do it.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any aspects of Theosophy that you feel like have most influenced your life? I know we've talked about the three pillars of the three legs of Theosophy. Is there anything else that you would add to that you think has most influenced you?
I think my favorite aspect of Theosophy is certainly the worldview and the ethic that flows out of that. And so what I'm really saying is practical applications of Theosophical teachings. That is my greatest interest, which I think is why, you know, working with the TOS is such a good fit, because service is the best way to put the teachings into practice. And there's nothing like a service project to cause us to get to know ourselves. And, you know, that is the point of a lot of spiritual teachings, is getting to know yourself. And boy, when we get involved in service, we really, really get to know ourselves. I had a friend who was a Theosophical member years ago. She has passed away now, but she was an RN all her life. And she was just very active. And then when she retired from professional practice, she started volunteering as an RN with the Red Cross. And she would talk about how, boy, when the call comes, we go. We don't stop and question. We just drop everything and go. And we're gone wherever we have to go. We're gone for as long as we need to be gone. And so she was a very active, you know, just service-oriented person. And then her husband sustained a neck injury on a bicycle, and she became his caregiver for a time, for an extended period of time. And I'm sure she was very good at it. She was just a wonderful, loving person. But she said, boy, am I finding out how selfish I am. Because when you're more tied down and it's something that you really have to do, and you're knee deep and you can't just walk away, she started to really get to know herself and see that maybe there was a little selfishness left in her. And then something else happened. She developed a degenerative disease that would eventually take her life. And her husband had to become her caregiver. And she said that was the hardest thing of all. To be cared for was the hardest thing of all. But as somebody pointed out recently, you can only have a giving relationship. One person gives, somebody has to receive. So for that to work, somebody has to be willing to receive.
Really, that has been a tough thing for many people to do, is to be able to receive the gift as well.
Sure.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story. The demons do come out. Let's see, Blavatsky said something about that. She said, you know, all Theosophists can be so wonderful. They can meditate and be so kind and so generous and everything, but have somebody stomp on your toe and just, that'll show you who you are.
So
Oh,
true.
yeah. Now, I know that you have been active as a president of the Denver Lodge in a lot of different roles in that. How do you feel that the lodge meetings have played a part in your life, your experience of being a member in the lodge? You know, there are a lot of people that really maybe they don't, there's a lodge available, but they really don't join. What is your experience in terms of the lodge, being in the lodge itself?
For me, it is irreplaceable. It is necessary. It is invaluable. And I say that because we are a study center, and so largely we study. Certainly we have a lot of programs where someone is providing a lecture, or you know, we're watching a video or something like that. But for the most part, we study and discuss. And when we do that, it's kind of like picking each other's brains, but when people are sharing their particular viewpoints on a teaching, you're seeing that idea from different angles. You know, I would see it maybe from this angle. Somebody else comes at it like this. And by the time you get everybody's perspectives, you've got a much more whole picture than you could ever have come up with on your own. You know how sometimes we say we read a book and then years later we reread it and we say, oh, I'm picking up on things I never saw before. That's what happens in a group discussion. And so you can have those different perspectives even right now. And just the friendship and the bonds are so invaluable. We have I think, a particularly harmonious, lovely group. It has always been that way. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. We love our group meetings.
Well, in terms of the Federation meetings, now, some people might not know that we have local meetings and we have Federation meetings, and then we have an annual summer conference. Could you speak a little, have you been involved in going to the Federation meetings? I'm sure you have, and if so, just the value of going to a Federation meeting.
Well, so where I live in Denver, we're so sparsely populated out here in terms of the Theosophical Society. We don't have a federation that includes Denver, Colorado, or Wyoming, or this part of the country, because we're so spread out that we would have to hop on a plane to go to a federation meeting, which kind of defeats the purpose. It's supposed to be a coming together of people in a relatively, you know, within a few hundred miles region, such that you could jump in the car and drive to a federation meeting. But we would have to get on a plane and fly anyway. So at that point, we might as well just go to the National Center in Wheaton, or we might just as well go to Cortona Institute of Theosophy or something like that. So we really don't have a federation. I did attend a Mid-South Federation meeting a number of years ago when I was invited to be a speaker, and it was fantastic. And I could see how it's what everything I said about a local group except expanded, because you had people from different groups, and that was wonderful. I loved it. If we had federation meetings out here, I would definitely make a point of attending.
Well, I know that you've been to national meetings, and so can you tell us a little bit about the Summer National Conference and what the value might be for people to attend that meeting, which always happens in July. As a matter of fact, it's happening in the next couple of weeks here.
Mm-hmm. So I attended my first one in 2009, and I was spurred on to do that because Betty Bland was president at the time, and she sent me an email, or somebody sent it on her behalf, asking me to if I would be a speaker at the 2010 Summer National Conference. And I thought, boy, I better go to one in 2009 so that I'm, you know, familiar with how that is, so that I won't be so stressed and so scared. So I started attending the Summer National Conferences in 2009 and have attended every one since. I always say they're kind of like a family reunion, because again, what I said about the local group and then the federation and the national group is even a larger group. And so it's wonderful exposure to people, not only all over the United States, but almost invariably people from other countries will come to our conferences. And so you really get a nice exposure to people all over the country and all over the world. And you start to see that while we are all like-minded, we all have our own unique perspectives, and yet there's a like-mindedness that is or a family sense that is just so comforting. So I always characterize those meetings as a family reunion. That's how it feels to me.
Well, yes, and since the pandemic, and this video may be viewed long after the pandemic has gone by, passed away, but we have done some things differently. I know that the summer meeting this year and the past 2 years will be a video presentation, and I'm wondering whether you think about the pandemic and the Theosophical Society and your study group. Could you just comment on that, whether you any benefits or things that it broke down? Just make a comment about that.
Well, so I think most people's experience was in most of the groups, and this is certainly true of our local group, and I know it's true at the national level as well. When you start holding meetings by Zoom, there is the distinct disadvantage that you're not in the room with your friends. You're not in the room with people that you'd like to be with. You're not going to go down and have lunch with them. You're not going to stand and talk with them after the lecture. So you lose that in-person contact. However, the upside is that people who wouldn't have otherwise been able to attend can attend. So for example, this is the Denver metro area. It's pretty big. And so if you live 45 minutes from the meeting site on a cold, icy night, you might not attend the meeting because it would be quite a project to go out. But if you can just sit in your living room and open up your computer, people who wouldn't otherwise attend will do that. And similarly with the Summer National Conference at the national level, when we started doing it by Zoom, there were people who attended for the first time, people who'd been a member for ages and ages, and for whatever reason, they just couldn't go to the national conference. That just didn't seem like a feasible project for them. But the fact that they could participate by Zoom was wonderful. And they were so excited that they were finally able to participate, and they really loved it. So, there are advantages to in-person meetings and advantages to the Zoom meetings as well. And I think most local groups now have picked up people who've started to attend and wouldn't be able to in person, and they don't want to give that up. So a lot of groups are trying to do some kind of a hybrid.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I'm sure you've mentioned Cortona, so I'm wondering if you've gone to any lectures or meetings at Cortona, and maybe you could just tell people what Cortona is about, if anybody's just hearing about this for the first time, and what's available there for people that are in Theosophy.
I will do my best. So the Cortona Institute of Theosophy is an international theosophical center. It is not part of the Theosophical Society in America. It is directly attached to our international headquarters at Adyar. But they offer an on-campus series of lectures, seminars, workshops, presentations, and you can go and stay on the property. It is I want to say 40-acre, or maybe it's more than that. It's probably more than that. It's a large property, and they have student housing available on the campus. So you can go stay there, and you have your own little unit with a kitchenette, and you can stay for a few days or a week or 2 weeks. And it's really just such a beautiful retreat center. There's a library there and a bookstore, and then you can attend your programs, and they're very careful not to over-program. So there's always plenty of free time, which is lovely when you're in such a beautiful, peaceful place. You have lots of time for walking around, strolling, contemplating. There are meditation gardens, there's a labyrinth. So it's a wonderful place of regeneration and renewal.
So that brings up an idea that we talk about in spirituality a lot, and that's the idea of having a retreat. Do you think it's important for people on the spiritual path to have a spiritual retreat from just regular life?
Yeah, it has been useful for me. I've been to quite a few retreats at Cortona, and meditation tends to be a big component of those. I find them useful. It's not something I would want to do maybe every month, but every year or two, I find it to be very useful just to kind of stop the normal routine and have a time to just kind of go deeper within and be with very like-minded people who are doing the same thing. It is wonderful. When you talk about meeting Theosophists from all over the world, I have met the most interesting people at Cortona.
That's
Very,
fun, isn't it?
very useful, yeah.
And it also shows a different aspect of life. People look at things a different way. It broadens our perspective for sure.
Sure.
And how can we be a universal brotherhood and sisterhood if we don't ever meet any of our brothers and sisters? somebody
It's helpful to actually
somebody that doesn't look like us and talks differently than we do.
right.
It's real easy to love our people in our own home.
And yet you find that when you meet people from around the world, different cultures who are studying Theosophy, again, their viewpoints may be a little different, and yet there's this like-mindedness that is so wonderful, and you just feel like you've known them for the longest time.
Yes, I think there's a lyric from a song that I repeat every time I can, because it's love in any language spoken from the heart brings us all together, never apart. And so we do have that love aspect that everybody has to in unison, and we have it together. So one last question that I'd like to ask you, or if there's any other thing you'd like to say, but are there any books that you would recommend, especially maybe for a beginner in Theosophy, or any particular book that you really loved?
Well, I'm like so many other Theosophists. I'm going to name the one that so many people name, and that is At the Feet of the Master. That is my #1 favorite, because it was written so simplistically, and oftentimes the most profound ideas are stated the most simply. It doesn't have to be complicated. And so I love that book for its profoundness and yet its simplicity. I guess instead of naming particular books, maybe I could name authors. I mentioned earlier Clara Codd. I do enjoy reading Jeffrey Hodson. I'm a big Annie Besant fan, and anything by N. Sri Ram will lift you up. His writing is exquisite. And actually, Generajadasa, C. Generajadasa is another author that will do that.
Well, thank you. Well, I want to thank you so much for speaking with me today. And I wonder, is there anything that we haven't covered, any advice that you would like to give, or synopsis of what we said, or just anything that you've got on your mind to close down?
Just one last little tidbit, in case anybody was intrigued by the Theosophy for Children. I worked with a Theosophist in England to produce a series of, I don't know, 4 or 5 videos where we presented teachings, theosophical teachings, in a way that adults in their lives can present those teachings to children. So parents, grandparents, teachers, we tackled a lot of topics that children want to know about, but things that are difficult to learn about. And so if anybody wants to take a look at those videos, they might get some ideas on how to talk to children about wisdom teachings and ethics and morality and theosophy. So those are on YouTube, and I think you're going to, are you able to link it?
I will link those for people.
Okay.
We're going to have plenty of links for everyone about the topics that we've talked about. So many rich topics that we've covered today. I want to thank you, Kathy, with all my heart. It's wonderful for you to share yourself. One more service. I know your time is valuable because you do so many things. Thank you again so much. Any last word?
Just thank you for having me. It's been very enjoyable.
Thank you again, and take care.